I didn't notice the storm until the power flickered over my desk and the screensaver failed to wake. Rain hurled itself against the glass facade of our building, the drops long and slanted like strands of gray silk. The office had the soft hush of late evening, printers settling, the elevator's faraway hum, a jazz standard bleeding faintly from someone's phone. I cupped my hands around a paper cup of espresso the intern had left for me and felt the warmth waggle against my palms. A small mercy after a day of memos and crises that had stretched so long the sun had abandoned us before 6. I am an executive editor at Blackline Publishing. My job is to clean. Not floors or windows, but sentences, press releases, investor updates, speeches for authors who have never spoken, and most intimately, emails from the C-suite to 1,000 employees. I sand down edges, remove unintentional stings and little vanities, wedge grace where there's only hurry. It is careful work. It asks for discretion. And discretion is what I have had, more than optimism, more than sleep, ever since my life cracked down the middle 3 years ago and quietly kept going on either side of the fracture. On the other side of the glass, the city showed itself in fractures too. Light and shadow, office to office, floor to floor. It had rained all week. The weather app promised the same tomorrow. I took a sip, tasted bitter chocolate, and pulled up the folder labeled Garen, Outbox. He had arrived 2 years after my divorce, an appointment that came with rumors like bees. Aggressive, brilliant, ruinously private. Garen Holt, our new chief strategy officer, stolen from a tech firm that had gone from garage to global in 5 years. He was in his 40s like me. He wore suits in shades that had names, not colors, steel, ash night. He was never flustered. He did not tell stories at the coffee pot. Most of the company, most of the city, was either a stage or a phone. He moved as if neither existed. He typed the way he walked, measured, purposeful, without a single wasted flourish. In his first week, he requested that all of his broad communications be routed through communications for tone and clarity. There were 3 of us who could handle C-suite messages under the NDAs that sat on our desks like bricks, and I was the one with the least appetite for the spotlight. I said yes. I kept it quiet. And then, day after day, I read him. Not gossip, not speculation, but words. In them I found the coldness people mistook for arrogance, and beyond it a fidelity to what could be proven. I learned his preference for the word, nevertheless, when the board disagreed, and measured when analysts wanted euphoria. I learned how to bend his we without breaking it. I learned to soften the place where he cut too clean. Nobody knew that my heart started to beat a little faster when an email arrived flagged review. Nobody knew that the rhythm of my day changed to match his. Late mornings, long nights, the sense that the room grew just a fraction warmer when a draft landed in my inbox. Certainly, he did not. If he noticed the way his sentences came back with their collars straightened and mothered into kindness, he never said. If he thought about the person behind the edits, he did not show it. In meetings, he would sit across from me and examine a chart while I pretended to examine the same chart. Our eyes would meet when I raised a question. He always nodded, as if he'd been waiting for it. Polite, controlled, charged. The storm climbed up the glass and rattled the window frames. I opened the newest note in Garen, Outbox. It had no subject line yet, only reorg timeline draft. This sort of thing I could do in my sleep. Reassure, outline, invite questions. But the tone had an extra edge tonight, a hard truth he was trying not to blunt. I began with the easy fixes, verbs to verbs, a buffering phrase here and there. when my cursor slipped and jumped a line to a second, unsent draft below. The preview showed only the first 7 words. If there were a test for self-control, it might begin with a line like that. I don't know what I meant to say. I told myself it was a personal note misfiled, perhaps a fragment, nothing meant for a broader audience. We all have half-written thoughts in our outboxes, sealed letters still deciding if they want to be sent. But the subject line was empty, and my name was lit, faintly as the addressee. 2. Nira.blakely@blacklyncorp.com, mail to nira.blakely@blacklyncorp.com. I sat very still, the way you do before a glass falls, and you choose whether to try and catch it or let it shatter. The office was nearly empty. The espresso cooled. Rain shivered along the window like 1,000 fingertips. I clicked. The draft was dated that afternoon, time-stamped at 4:12 p.m., a half hour before the budget meeting where he'd asked me, with a quiet curve of thanks, to give shape to his remarks. The body began without salutation. Garen never wasted ink on flourish. I don't know what I meant to say when I stood in the doorway of your office last week, except that I am aware of the way your work touches mine. This is not the sort of thing we put in writing. It is not the sort of thing I say at all. Nevertheless, I've seldom believed in accidents. When I moved here, I assumed this place would be efficient, and I would be less alone. It is efficient. I am not less alone. I do not know what form honesty is allowed to take here. I do know that when I read what you have done to my words, I think of relief. It is not merely polish. It is understanding. Do you realize that you have eased the sharpness in my voice? That you make me palatable to people who have never sat with me long enough to know I do not like to hurt anyone. I simply don't know how to be soft in public. I won't explain this further now. There are questions I am not entitled to ask. There are griefs you carry that are not my business. Perhaps the only generosity left is to leave this draft unsent and pretend I was never this foolish. I am sending you 3 more communications for review before 8. We will see each other at 9. G. The cursor blinked inside the white box like a little pulse. The draft had not been sent. Maybe he had forgotten it, and it had fallen here by accident between reorg timelines and Q3 investor language, like a confession left in a stack of contracts. The power flickered again. A shadow moved. I turned and saw that my reflection in the glass looked like a woman twice my age, and also 16, wide-eyed, clutching a cup. I closed the draft, breath locked in my throat, and read it again. I told myself it was a kindness meant for no one in particular, that he had copy-pasted a paragraph to test a font size and accidentally addressed it to me. But the truth stood there patiently, like it had been waiting its turn at the mic. He had meant to write to me. He had meant these words for me. I did not know then what part of me that revelation would wake: shame, hope, fear. I only knew that the city lights looked different, as if someone had wiped their surface with a cloth, and the shape of my solitude in the office had shifted just a little to make space for something else. The next morning bristled with umbrellas. People came in damp and apologetic. I had resolved to ignore the draft, to behave as if I had never seen it. That was the safest choice. Discretion is an armor you sew day by day until you forget where the seams are. At 9:02 he arrived for the leadership stand-up. He stood beside the whiteboard, sleeves unrolled, tie perfect, hair carrying the faint memory of rain. I did not need to be there, but I had decided to be there with a folder and a pen in case anyone needed rescue from their own syntax. It's a habit. It's also an excuse. He acknowledged the room and me with that same nod he always gave: thanks, recognition, neutrality. It was a language we had learned together. There was no sign, not one, that anything had changed. He was speaking about distribution bottlenecks in mystery hardbacks when his eyes lifted and his gaze settled, for 3 seconds, on mine. It would have been meaningless if I hadn't read the draft. It would have been everything else if I had admitted to myself that I had. I kept count of my breathing while the team argued about additional printings, the costs of paper, the new logistics vendor. The storm had left a chill behind. The air smelled faintly of wet wool and coffee. He yielded the floor to our head of sales with a small motion and took a seat 2 chairs down from me. The room buzzed. He leaned forward to mark a note. The cuff of his sleeve brushed the table. I noticed a scratch on his wrist, thin as pencil lead. I had the wild thought that I would recognize him by touch if the lights went out. Afterward, in the hall of glass conference rooms, he matched my stride. "Your edits on the board memo," he said. "They were useful." I thanked him and hoped my voice had not betrayed the way my heart had tilted all the furniture in my chest 30 degrees. "I will send the investor draft this afternoon," he added, tight window. His tone was the same as it had always been in public, formal, threaded with gratitude. "Send it," I said. "I'll make it sound like a human being wrote it." His mouth did the rare thing I had seen only 2 or 3 times. A half smile that looked like he had found a private joke and decided not to share it. "It already sounds like one," he said, and then he kept walking, and we both let the elevator doors close on whatever might have been. We were not the only people who noticed each other. Offices thrive on attention the way ivy thrives on old brick. A rumor had been circling for weeks. Someone had leaked a portion of a contract to a competitor. It was small but precise, enough to hint at our bid strategy for a prize author who had decided to leave his longtime house. The leak had come from inside. People were careful with their inboxes and careless with their eyes. I caught slivers of talk in kitchen alcoves. Who stayed late, who had friends at other houses, who ordered the wrong kind of wine at off-sites. I had not known loneliness could feel crowded. My divorce had been quiet, the kind of end that does not smell like smoke, only like absence. We had split our books in an afternoon and said practical things about the piano. Afterward, I had made changes, strong ones, smart ones, and yet there was the steady ache of a life both too full and insufficient. Black line gave me purpose. The city gave me motion. And the nights gave me a room with a window, and the sound of a neighbor's television turned low. Now there was the threat of scandal, and the cool thrum of something I refused to name. When his drafts came in, they came with facts and a certain useful dryness. The investor letter, firm, reassuring, precise. The author outreach email, brief, curtly, correct. He trusted me to warm the tone just enough. I began to suspect he trusted me with more than that. It is not the place of words to betray people, but sometimes they are accomplices. In a Q3 note, he used a phrase. "Nevertheless, we remain certain of our course." That echoed the draft he had not sent me. Nevertheless. It sat there like a seam visible only to the two of us. Office gossip is often a mirror held up to boredom. Still, I grew careful about visible closeness. I no longer lingered near his desk with a question I could have sent via Slack. I chose different elevators. There are ways to feed a rumor and ways to let it starve. I fed it nothing. But restraint is a kind of hunger of its own. It happened because a flight was canceled. We were both scheduled to attend a conference in Chicago. Panels about the future of hybrid publishing. Meetings with editors who wore sneakers with suits. A party at a museum where the hors d'oeuvres resembled origami. I arrived at the airport mid-afternoon and learned, with everyone else, that weather had seized the country's middle. Gates groaned with human sound. The departures board was a cuneiform tablet of delays. Blackline had put us on separate flights. His was later. Mine was cancelled. The next best option was a last-minute evening train that would arrive so late the museum party would have been dismantled and the caterers halfway home. I stood there in the carousel of irritation and called our travel coordinator. She found a single ticket on the later flight instead, the one he was on, because 2 cancellations had opened a gap nobody else had pounced on yet. I took it. The gate area was crowded. I saw him from a distance, as one does in an airport, out of context, a familiar face among strangers, a piece of your life extracted and placed where nobody knows the file name. He was sitting near the windows, jacket off, reading a printout. When I approached, he looked up, and I watched surprise shift to something milder. "Hello," he said. "You're on this one too." "Chicago isn't coming to us," I said. "We might as well go to Chicago." We made the sort of small talk people make when they know each other's calendar intimately and nothing else. Delays. The industry. Which panel would be tolerable? He offered me his seat with a gentle motion when one opened near him. I declined and took the one across the aisle. He did not press. We waited without speaking. The terminal had that holiday smell airports sometimes have: baked pretzels, overexcited perfume, everyone's jacket damp at the same time. Beyond us, the city's late light spread, a dull gold under a lid of cloud. The flight boarded. I was 2 rows behind him. We lifted through the haze and into a simpler color, the deep blue that lives above weather. In my row, a man slept open-mouthed against the window, and a woman answered emails with the zealous concentration of someone who will be praised for speed and not for thought. I watched a patch of moon above the wing and tried not to count how many hours I had slept that week. The cabin settled into breathing and plastic clinks. Midway through, the cabin went dim and quiet, and a flight attendant I had not noticed before, carrying a tray like a dancer, paused near me. "Mr. Holt says you might like sparkling water," she said. Her voice was low. "He usually asks for one. They were out. I told him so." He shrugged. I thanked her and took the seltzer. It was such a small thing and such a complete confession of attention that I felt my face become warm in the cool cabin air. I drank half and set it on the tray. I wanted every motion to be slow. Gratitude is an instrument people play too fast. We landed late. At the hotel, the conference check-in desk had lost 3 reservations and invented 2 others. Mine was among the newly born. The clerk apologized into the air. "We do have 1 king left," she added, "and the suite for the keynote speaker. But he, Mr. Green, arrives tomorrow. We can offer the suite just for tonight." The other guest in our party was a younger editor who looked overwhelmed by the chaos. I insisted he take the suite. He protested. I insisted again, and he blushed and took it. Which is why, at nearly midnight, I found myself with a key to a room 3 doors down from where I knew Garin was staying, because I had happened to notice his reservation note on the desk, since it had been placed near mine, and because sometimes I notice things. The hallway was hushed, carpet muting the sound of everything except my own pulse. I was putting my key into the slot when the door down the hall opened, and he stepped out, jacket reinstated, expression thoughtful. He saw me. For a second, he looked surprised to find me in the same place he was. Then he folded the surprise away like a handkerchief and came toward me. We stopped 2 feet apart. The hallway light was soft. The quiet was the sort that has its own volume. "You're here," he said, making something obvious sound elegant. "I am," I said. "Thanks for the seltzer." "I thought you might like it," he said. "I could be wrong sometimes." "You often are," I said, and watched the half-smile appear again. We stood there, the way people stand when a choice is a patient animal between them. He glanced at my door and then back at me. I could smell the faintest hint of his cologne, something clean and restrained. He said my name like a question. He has never used it like an adornment. It sounded new in his mouth, and also inevitable. "Your draft," I said very quietly, surprised by my own courage. "The one you didn't send." I saw it. He did not pretend to misunderstand. His head tipped a fraction, the way it does when he decides to keep what he feels inside and tell the truth anyway. "I hoped you would," he said. Just then, because life has a sense of humor, the hallway filled with the sound of a door slamming somewhere and two colleagues laughing too loud. We stepped backward in unison into our separate doorways. The moment thinned, then steadied. "Tomorrow," he said, "we will sit side by side and pretend we do not know one another's middle names. Perhaps we will behave. Perhaps we will not." "Tomorrow," I repeated. He inclined his head, as if in thanks for a kindness I had not yet given, and went back to his room. I stood there with my key and the thick feeling that I had chosen something without entirely understanding its shape. The conference was a pageant of confidence and polished panic. Panels populated by sharp-elbowed visionaries. Coffee strong enough to strip the enamel off your teeth. Hallways of whispered speculation about the leak back home. The keynote speaker arrived. The younger editor carried his luggage like contraband. Garin sat with the heads of 3 divisions and ate a protein bar as if it were an assignment. I watched him from across the room and felt the thin wire drawn taut between us. In the second panel of the day, across a table of microphones, I recognized a woman from a competitor house. She used to be our head of acquisitions. She had left abruptly, citing family reasons that had convinced few. Now she spoke in careful neutral paragraphs about healthy cross-pollination between traditional and hybrid models. She looked good, which is to say she looked precisely the way she wanted to. Between sessions, our CEO gathered a small knot of us and hissed facts. The board suspected an internal source for the leak, possibly in strategy. It was an accusation without a name. Tension rose like heat from a road. The idea that anyone would suspect Garin made me feel suddenly, stupidly protective. I wanted to raise my hand and say he would rather let his own blood than trade in secrets that were not his. Instead, I said nothing because I am good at my job, which is not to voice my heart in the hall, but to edit statements until nobody sues. That night, the museum party dripped with money, not ours, donors. We stood under an installation that resembled a flock of glass birds paused mid-surge. The air smelled like lilies with a grief complex. He moved through the room as he always did, focused, contained, missing nothing. In a corner near the sculpture of a man made from welded screws, I let myself be spoken to by a man who sold audio rights and told jokes like darts. My laughter sounded like someone else's. Later, as speeches droned, he appeared beside me without making the space alter. It simply accepted him, the way rain accepts a city, inevitable and exact. "Walk?" he asked. We stepped out to a balcony facing the city's late-night face. Rain threatened but did not commit to falling. The skyline was a line drawn by a steady hand. Below us, taxis blinked in rows like a shared thought. "I need to know whether you're safe," I said, surprising myself again. He looked at me the way you look at a person who has walked into a room and found your private handwriting on the wall and not erased it. As safe as truth allows, he said. Our CEO enjoys the theater of suspicion. It will pass. Or it will not, and I will find another place to be exactly as I am. I have done that before. I thought of the draft. I thought of words as bridges and as locks. You wrote to me, I said. Yes, he said. Why did you not send it? Because I am not in the habit, he said, of asking someone to step closer to a fire just because I find the warmth tolerable. I wanted to say that his restraint made me foolishly fond of him, the way a difficult book makes you love it more when you finish. I wanted to say that I had not been warm in a long time. Instead, I said, I divorced 3 years ago. He nodded once, as if I had handed him a key, and he recognized the door it fit. I am not divorced, he said. But I am no longer married precisely. The legal word is separation. The personal word is quiet. He leaned his elbows on the stone balustrade and looked at the city, which looked back with 1,000 professional gazes. We lived together for a time and loved each other without understanding the language of affection. She speaks it as ritual. I speak it as choice. We discovered that difference before we punished one another for it. We opted for mercy. People forget mercy is an option. I told him not all at once that my former husband had been kind, faithful, and tired of living with somebody who processed every feeling like a draft to be sent only when perfect. That I had learned to give compliments the same way I gave feedback, and that it had exhausted us both. We stood a little closer than is proper and not close enough to be improper. The door opened and closed. Voices surged and receded. Jazz threaded itself through the hum from the party. Someone will accuse me of something, he said. Perhaps soon. When that happens, I need you to know I did not do it. I already do, I said. And if what I wrote in that draft was clumsy and unfit for daylight, he added, softer, forgive me. I will not ask you to hold it. You already did, I said. And I already am. He turned and I turned, and there was a breath, smaller than a heartbeat, that contained everything we were not saying. It was not a kiss, not yet. It was a recognition. Then the crisis came. Our CEO appeared in the doorway with 2 board members flanking him like parentheses. Their faces were bright with the sort of concern that makes rooms colder. Garen, the CEO said, we've got a problem we need to discuss. Now. He straightened and nodded. His eyes met mine. He followed them inside. I watched the door close and felt the night lean away from me. News travels along lines you cannot chart. Before midnight, someone told someone that strategy had been the source of the leak, and that our chief strategy officer had used a personal email to send a PDF fragment to our former head of acquisitions. The evidence, they whispered, was incontrovertible. The board would require a statement. HR had been notified. My brain did not accept it. My body did not either. It prepared to fight. I texted him knowing full well that anything written can be read by others. Are you safe? He wrote back, which he almost never did. He hates the intimacy of text. Not yet. The room filled with expensive laughter as if to make a point. Somewhere the jazz shifted keys. I left before the speeches and went back to my room with my heart beating like a shoe in a dryer. At 1:18 a.m., my phone buzzed. There was a single line. Conference room on 12. The 12th floor was for private events. It was empty now. The glass of the conference room reflected us as we entered. 2 figures, careful. The city leaned against the windows, its lights like 100 watchful eyes. He closed the door and stood with his hands in his pockets, which is how he contains himself when the other option is to break. His tie was loosened. His eyes were very alert. There was a cut along his mind somewhere you could not see. They asked me to resign, he said. They believe I sent the file. Then we will show them otherwise, I said. Tell me what happened. He explained in sentences that were bone. Someone had used his personal email address to create a draft to the former head of acquisitions. The draft had not been sent. It had been parked in the outbox, like that other draft, like a trap. The fragment itself had been accessed from a server he did not touch. He had always printed from Strategy's secure printer because he mistrusted our document management system. An activity log had been altered to place him at a keyboard he did not use. And if his precise nature made him look like the kind of man who could do such a thing, it made him also the kind of man who kept records so exact they were their own defense. Why would they want you? I asked, already knowing. He threatened certain comfortable inefficiencies. He demanded clarity. He made the people who hide under charm feel visible. I will not try to be loved, he said simply. Only to be useful. It is a different kind of risk. We sat. The chairs were the expensive kind that make you feel like your spine has been replaced by a better one. He rubbed a thumb along the line of the table and spoke about evidence. And I listened not as his colleague, but as someone who had chosen a side before she knew what the battle was. You cannot send an email you never opened, I said, thinking of my own accidental discovery 2 nights before. But you can create the appearance of intent, who knew enough to exploit your habits. We both thought of the same name. The former head of acquisitions had worked here long enough to know where everyone kept their ghosts. She had left with her passwords scoured. But a friend could have remained. A friend with a grudge or a hunger or a need. We need to find the change in the logs, I said, knowing that our IT director was a good man who loved puzzles and would be more offended by a forged timestamp than by a death threat. I have begun, he said. It will not be elegant, but it will be decisive. He paused. I asked you here because I did not want the first thing you heard in the morning to be a lie attached to my name. And because... He stopped. It was a clean stop, not a stumble. Because I have been a man out of practice with desire, he said. And when it returned, it arrived with your handwriting on it. The quiet after that felt like a white room. The city pressed its careful forehead against the glass. I thought of my ex-husband, of the good patience we had exercised as if it were a gym membership, and of how both of us had lifted ourselves out of a love that never learned the shape of our actual bodies. I thought of the draft and of the fact that we were both people who wrote what we meant and then did not send it. I am not in the habit, I said, of falling in love with people I work for. Nor I, he said. I will not ask you to risk your work. I will not ask you for anything. I am telling you what is true. If the truth dies here, so be it. He had put his hands on the table as if surrendering a weapon. I reached over, without thinking about rules that had never protected me from anything that mattered, and covered his hand with mine. His fingers were warm and still. He looked at our hands the way one looks at a photograph of a place you have never been and always meant to go. We will fix this, I said, and then we will decide whether to be cowards. A line moved near his mouth. It could have been a smile. It could have been the ghost of one. The door opened abruptly. The CEO stood in the frame with HR beside him. His expression was careful in the way of men who have practiced their expressions in mirrors. No need to fix anything, he said airily, as if we had been arranging flowers. We've reached a temporary understanding. Garen will step back while we conduct a review. He looked at our hands as if they were a stain on the carpet. I suppose it's just as well you are here, Mira. Communications will need to prepare a statement for the staff by morning. Let's keep it measured. Measured. I withdrew my hand. He did not move. The CEO left a packet on the table and departed with HR, both of them fastidiously not looking at either of us. When the door shut, the room seemed to exhale. You should not write that statement, he said. It isn't fair to you. It will be fair in the only way that matters, I said. It will be true. I wrote it while he sat nearby and did not speak, and when I wrote the word nevertheless, we both looked up. Later in the hallway, he walked me to the elevator. The hotel air had the clean echo of 3 in the morning. At the doors, he stopped the way he had in the hotel corridor the night before. If this ruins me, he said, it will not be because I lied. It will be because I told too much truth to people who profit from a gradient. If it ruins you, I said, it will be because you were inconvenient. The elevator arrived. I stepped in. He did not. Our shoulders nearly touched. The space between us held a heat so measured that it felt like a decision already made. I turned my head. He did the same. We were inches apart. The night will fade, he said, and we will behave. Will we? I said. And I kissed him. A brief, unadorned kiss, more punctuation than sentence. The elevator chimed. I stepped back. The doors closed on his face, which carried the most beautiful expression I had ever seen on him, stunned, alive, a man who had been living with a fever and suddenly found his temperature normal. I slept like someone had remembered to turn off the light in a room. The review took 6 weeks. 6 weeks of rain, city lights, espresso steam. Whispers, then quiet, then more whispers. HR had procedures. The board had appetites. It had secrets it had been waiting for someone to admire. We went to work. He remained, at first on leave, then permitted to return under a set of conditions that made some people feel powerful for a while. Evidence accumulates if you let it. It does not need to be rushed. Our director, whose idea of hell is a messy database, found the tampering. The altered login timestamp that had been moved by 2 hours, the IP address that belonged to a ghost computer nobody used anymore, but that still pinged the network like a lonely bird. The ghost computer had been assigned to a contractor in legal who had a cousin at our competitor. The cousin had a friend who owed a favor to the woman who used to be our head of acquisitions. The line was almost elegant. The board wanted a confession. They got one, of sorts. People are not careful when they feel clever. They leave the wrapper on the floor near the wastebasket. The CEO issued a statement that tried to sound both contrite and omniscient. I edited it, because words are what I fix, even when the person holding them makes my skin crawl. But for Garen's return note to staff, I refused to remove the strongest sentence. Trust is a bridge you walk one careful step at a time, he wrote, and I understand if some of you choose to wait until others cross first. I left it. The CEO tried to cut it. Garen insisted. We kept it. Measured but unafraid. During those weeks, we became experts at the art of proximity without spectacle. We did not touch at the office. We used the elevator like a truce. On a Saturday morning, we walked in different boroughs and sent each other a single photograph of rain on different rivers. On a Wednesday night, I sat on my couch and proofread a letter he had written to a mentor he refused to flatter. On a Monday afternoon, I passed him in the hall, close enough to smell whatever clean cologne he wore, and he said, nevertheless, in a way that meant several things at once. We did not declare anything, we behaved. We were reckless only in how carefully we allowed the truth to survive. In the 7th week, the sky stopped pretending to be a sinkhole. The city rinsed itself in late summer light. We had a quarterly meeting in the big glass room where you can see both bridges if you stand in the right place. The team had brought cake because someone had worked here 10 years. Laughter felt like something earned, not borrowed. Afterward, he came to my office door, the same door he had mentioned in that draft I'd found in the rain. He leaned against the frame and looked down at the paperweight on my desk, the cheap glass one with the bubble in it like a trapped moon. "I have a proposal," he said. "I accept," I said, and he blinked, then smiled, an entire smile, not the half. "Dinner," he said, "in a place where nobody would recognize either of us unless they have a very particular interest in organizational flow charts." "I know a place," I said. We had never been reckless. We would not begin now. But we allowed a shape to emerge around us, a structure I would have recognized even if I had never edited a sentence in my life. "Subject, verb, object?" he asked. I answered. We went. The restaurant was small, the kind where you can hear the cutlery think. We sat at the corner table and did not talk about the company for a full 20 minutes. We talked about the first books we ever loved. His was a dog-eared science fiction paperback with a hero who fails elegantly. Mine was an Ann Tyler novel about ordinary people doing the art of living badly and then slightly better. He confessed that he had once tried to write a novel and burned it. I confessed that I sleep with a pen beside the bed because sometimes sentences arrive half-formed and make demands. We shared a plate and the idea that mercy is a choice you get to make more than once. When the waiter brought the check, he placed his hand on the table and did not move it. I placed mine next to it. Our fingers did not touch. They might have. It was enough. Outside, the city's night was a skylight turned upside down. We walked to the corner and stood waiting for a car that refused to come. "In that draft," I said, "you wrote that you did not know what form honesty was allowed to take here." He inclined his head, as if he were listening to a brief he had presented to a jury long ago. "I think the form is this," I said. "Not confession in words, exactly. Not spectacle. Just the refusal to pretend we are not happening." "And what are we?" he asked softly, "if someone were to request the executive summary?" "We are the awkward miracle of two people learning how to be soft in public," I said, and watched him look at me in the way that I had been wishing someone would for years, not with hunger, but with respect so bright it warmed my face. We did not kiss on the street. We are not 25. The night is not a stage. But when our car finally arrived and a jazz station murmured from the dash, he rested his hand beside mine and, halfway across the bridge, placed his fingertips against the back of my wrist, barely there. The city slid by like a story that had found its ending. Weeks passed into months. The rumor mills retooled for other grains. The CEO discovered a new platform for his theater. The former head of acquisitions found her spectacularness contained by consequences. The younger editor who had carried the keynote's luggage now carried a team and did not blush as easily. Life, which can be ruthless in how it insists upon itself, returned to its habits. We did not announce ourselves. We did not hide. We were seen by the right people and invisible to the wrong ones. In conference rooms, his gaze would rest on me when a sentence needed cutting, and I would inventory the room and say the thing nobody else had dared to. In elevators, the hum seemed tuned to a frequency we both could hear. In the hall, if our sleeves brushed, the static spark felt like a joke the universe told only to us. One late evening, months after the draft and the rain and the outbox that had become a bridge, I stayed to finish a note about a contract that needed mercy. The office emptied one body at a time until I could hear only the HVAC thinking. I stood, stretched, and went to the kitchen to rinse my cup. In the reflection of the glass, I saw him walk past my doorway and then stop, as if he had planned to step inside and remembered that plans are merely outlines, not destinies. "Come in," I said, not turning, because I knew it was him by the way the air changed. He stepped in. We did not turn on the overhead light. The city was our lamp. "I brought you something," he said, and set a folded piece of paper on my desk. I unfolded it. It was a printout of an email with no recipient filled in. The subject line read, "Draft, Honesty." "I thought you might want to see it," he said. It was the letter he had written the night he had not sent me the thing I was not supposed to see. He had removed nothing. He had added a single line at the end. "I will not ask you to be brave," it read. "But if you are, let me try to deserve it." I did not cry. Not exactly. My breath simply remembered itself, and the rest followed. I set the letter down and reached for him. He stepped into the circle of my arms with the ease of a man arriving home. He smelled like rain without rain. His hand rested against the small of my back and said, without words, that there are kinds of intimacy louder than declarations. We stood this way for a time that had no clock. The city performed its luminous ritual. The office lights dimmed one by one. We were our own kind of room. Later, much later, as we parted and as I turned off the lamps and let the hallway hold us in its hush, I thought of the first night I had sat in this very chair. Rain rattling the glass, espresso cooling, and found a draft addressed to me. That draft had been a small, tender rebellion against a life's worth of guarding. This now was the rest of the sentence. Choice, not chance. Quiet laughter in a kitchen when nobody is listening. The elevator hum and the pulse at the wrist. Breath and warmth, and the relief of being seen by the person you have watched not out of hunger but out of respect. Jazz coming from somewhere you cannot place. The knowledge that the people who would ask you to be smaller have left early, and the people who will help you become exactly your size are still working 2 doors down. I turned and looked at him, and we smiled at each other with the expression of conspirators who have chosen tenderness as their plot. He lifted the paperweight with the little moon bubble and placed it on the letter so it wouldn't slip. His shadow leaned into mine and stayed there, the way shadows do when they have found the surface that lets them be full. The office lights dimmed one by one, and his shadow lingered near mine, and in that beautiful, unremarkable quiet, we let the night fade around us until only our breath remained, and the promise of morning.